Hello everyone, I am the Medic Kirby, and welcome to my channel, The Commander Tavern. The Commander Tavern is a channel dedicated to my favorite Magic the Gathering format. The Brewery is a series on this channel showcasing my spicy brews under the deck text. On this episode of The Brewery, I'll be discussing my take on a commander recently spoiled from Streets of New Capenna, Lord Xander the Collector. If you like this deck or any of the cards I'll be mentioning throughout the video, please consider using my TCG Player affiliate link when purchasing those cards. You can find that link down in the description. It'll really help out the channel. The best way you can help support the channel is with my Patreon. For just $1, patrons get early access to certain videos on YouTube. In fact, patrons got a chance to see this video earlier. You can also support my channel for free by simply liking, subscribing, and sharing, which also helps out a lot. You can join my Discord server for free if you want to join the Commander Tavern community. All pertinent links are down in the description. Alright, let's get back to the episode. Xander is a 6/6 Vampire Demon Noble for 4 generic, 1 blue, 1 black, and 1 red. While 7 mana for a 6/6 isn't that far-fetched, he's also got 3 different triggered abilities. When he enters the battlefield, target opponent discards half of the cards in their hand rounded down. When he attacks, the defending player mills half of their library rounded down. And finally, when he dies, target opponent sacrifices half of their non-land permanents rounded down. To say that Xander is scary is quite the understatement. That being said, he's nowhere near broken nor even CDH level. He does cost 7 mana after all, and you can see him in the command zone since the beginning of the game. So he does have the potential of making you the arch enemy before the game even officially starts. However, the deck does have ways to buffer being the arch enemy, as well as making the most out of all of Lord Xander's 3 triggered abilities. First off, why only limit things to a single opponent? It is a social game, so he should be able to spread the love. That's why the deck is running plenty of effects to double Xander's abilities. Stronic Resonator and Lithoform Engine help us double any of Xander's 3 triggers for just 2 mana and tapping. The engine can also copy any other instant, sorcery, or permanent spell we cast, so it's also great on its own before Xander even hits the battlefield. These artifacts are so strong with Xander that Tawnos, Urza's Apprentice, is included in the deck. For just 2 mana and tapping, Tawnos can copy any artifact's activated or triggered ability. So we can use Tawnos to indirectly copy Xander's triggers by copying the Resonator or engine. Keep in mind that since Xander's abilities have everything, hitting the same opponent twice with the triggered copy will simply reduce their hand, board, or library by 75%, rounded down, since half of half is 1/4. Math, I know. So ideally, you want to be hitting multiple opponents with these effects. Panharmonicon, Conjurer's Closet, Thassa Deep Dwelling, and Deadeye Navigator help copy Xander's Enter the Battlefield trigger. Panharmonicon does it every time he enters the battlefield, which is amazing when combined with the other 3 cards that can blink Xander. Thassa and the Closet do it for free, but at the end of your turn, whereas Deadeye Navigator is scarier because you can blink Xander at will for just 2 mana so long as he's soulbound to it. Blade of Elves and Mirror Mockery are more ways to copy Xander's Enter the Battlefield trigger, but they will also copy Xander's Death trigger too. Since they both create the token copies when Xander is already attacking, the clone's attack triggers won't happen. However, that's not really the point. The point is, when the tokens are created, they will trigger their Enter the Battlefield trigger. Then, since you're breaking the legendary rule, they have to be sacrificed as a state-based action. Those copies died due to the legend rule will have their death triggers happen. So if you equipped Xander with Blade of Selves and attacked one opponent, you will create a clone for each other opponent, thus getting 3 Enter the Battlefield triggers. But state-based actions are checked in between things on the stack, so they'll be sacrificed due to the legend rule, and then you'll get 3 death triggers on the stack. This allows you to hit 3 opponents with 2 of his triggers each combat. So good. Now just imagine this combined with Panharmonicon. Port Raiser is a great way to multiply Xander's attack triggers by simply giving you additional combat steps. You can't get infinitely many though, since it can attack an opponent it has already attacked. But at least on its own, it's enough to potentially get us 3 additional combat steps per turn. That being said, when equipped with Blade of Selves, you can get a total of 12 additional combat steps instead if the 3 extra tokens manage to hit each opponent. Let's see that quickly. With Port Raiser equipped with Blade of Selves, you enter combat, attacking the first opponent you haven't attacked yet with Port Raiser. Myriad makes 3 tokens tapped and attacking. If all 4 connect, you get 4 additional combat steps. However, the tokens are exiled at the end of combat. Now, the original has to swing at a second opponent. Same thing happens, giving you 4 more additional combat steps. Finally, you enter combat to attack the final opponent you haven't hit yet, getting you 4 more additional combat steps. Since you already used up 2 of the 12 total additional combat steps, you have 10 left, which should be more than enough to take out the table with Xander. The deck has plenty of ways of making our board unblockable, but we'll see those in a bit. Brewactive Grandiloquent is an obvious include in Xander decks since he doubles the amount of cards being milled. Since Xander is milling half the library rounded down, Brewvac makes it so the rest of the library is milled along with it, essentially milling out an opponent just for attacking. This is super telegraphed though, so either cast Brewvac before attacking with Xander if you can protect him, or you might risk him eating removal before then. Sakashima of 1000 Phases, Sakashima the Imposter, and Spark Double are more ways of doubling Xander's triggers by simply copying Xander himself. All three clones help you get an additional Xander without breaking the legend rule, whereas Sakashima of 1000 Faces breaks the rule altogether. This means that if you had Xander enchanted with Mirror Mockery, you'd keep that token each combat, giving you even more copies of Xander. Felden of the Third Path and Hell's Caretaker help with reanimating Xander if he hits the graveyard. He costs a whopping 7 mana to cast, so in grindier games he's going to be nigh impossible to recast multiple times from the command zone. However, if we leave him in the graveyard, we can essentially reanimate him with little effort thanks to these cards. Felden does it even better since he leaves Xander in the graveyard, creating an artifact creature copy of him with haste. So you get the enter the battlefield trigger, the attack trigger, and the death trigger, since the tokens need to be sacrificed at the end of turn. Xander in the graveyard and Felden in play is quite the oppressive combination indeed. Neitherborn Altar is also included for good measure in case Xander gets too costly to recast from the command zone. Since the 3 life loss accumulates, don't be careless with how often you use it. Dauthi Voidwalker and Leonon of the Void don't double Xander's triggers per se, but they do prevent opponents from getting their graveyards back into their library, so it's not meaningless milling them out with Xander. It also prevents us from helping out the Graveyard Matters deck, so there's that as well. Gifts of Glorious Resurrector and Tergrid God of Fright are more ways of stopping Reanimator decks, since we can steal the creatures being killed by Xander's sacrifice effect. Any creature opponents sacrifice to Xander's death trigger will fall under our control thanks to these goth girlfriends. Tergrid's Lantern isn't even used in the deck. I never cast it once as the Lantern half when testing this deck, so just use Tergrid. Now earlier I mentioned making our board state unblockable. Naturally, that would be the best way to make the most out of Xander's triggers as well as of things like Port Razor. However, even if Xander is blocked and killed in combat, we get the death trigger too. The only downside is having to recast him from the command zone afterwards. So, in the grander scheme of things, it's better to be able to attack with total abandon without fear of being blocked. Swen Xuan, Lord of Wu, and Archetype of Imagination do this in spades by essentially making Xander unblockable. They can still block Xander with a creature with Horsemanship or a creature with Reach, respectively, but those creatures are so few and far between that Xander is essentially unblockable for all effects and purposes. The combo of Filth with Urborg to move Yawgmoth is another way of making Xander nigh unblockable by giving him Swamp Walk and your opponent's swamps. Again, there are some very niche ways of blocking Xander even with this combination, but that one's even rarer than Horsemanship or Reach. The deck doesn't have ways to discard cards from our hand, we can just cast Filth and sacrifice it to some of our own effects. Or cast Final Parting, which is a 1-card combo for this. Just put Filth in your graveyard and Urborg in your hand. Then play Urborg, making your board seemingly unblockable, all with just one spell. Final Parting is still good on its own too. Cabal Coffers is included to make the absolute most of Urborg, especially since Xander is so difficult to cast. If all of your lands are swamps, that can really help the Coffers tap down for a ton of black that already helps with 5/7 of Xander's casting cost, without even considering any future commander attacks. But we'll see the rest of the deck's mana acceleration further along. Returning to making Xander unblockable, Whispersilk Cloak, Rogue's Passage, Thassa God of the Sea, Prowler's Helm, and Dauthi Embrace do just that. Well, the first 3 make Xander outright unblockable since the other 2 are still slightly situational. But the Helm makes him unblockable by anything besides walls, which isn't that common a creature type unless they also have changelings. But Shadow is even rarer. Giving Xander Shadow is along the same vein as giving him Horsemanship. The Cloak is possibly the best of these since it protects Xander with Shroud. But keep in mind that giving him Shroud means not being able to target him with our own beneficial effects. Thassa has the added bonus of giving us Scry 1 each upkeep, which helps with card quality. Cathedral of War helps out with a potential commander damage win if Xander is unblockable. If we only attack with Xander, he gets +1/+1, making him 7/7, and thus a 3-turn clock for grindier games. If we're unable to eliminate anyone via mill, we can simply smack them thrice and end it there. And it doesn't even take up a slot in the deck since it's a mana generating land. Maze of Ith does take up a slot though, since it doesn't tap down for mana without Urborg in play. While it's included in the deck not necessarily for matchups against other Voltron commanders, it's great against those, but the reason it is included in the deck is for the same reason we're making Xander unblockable. We are prioritizing his attack trigger. If he's not unblockable, we simply attack with him, and if he gets blocked by a creature that might kill him, if we want him to live, just activate Maze of Ith on him, untapping him and preventing any damage he would give or receive, thus saving him. This is definitely some spicy tech for a Xander deck. As for other ways of protecting Xander, Lightning Greaves, Swiftfoot Boots, and Champion's Helm are a given. While Whispersilk Cloak gives Xander Shroud, we'd rather give him Hexproof instead. So the Helm and Greaves are amazing at that. The Helm's even better since it also pumps Xander for a faster commander damage win. While the boots give him Shroud, he's still getting haste for free, which is great. He does paint a target on your back since the beginning of the game, and people will undoubtedly keep removal open for him when he does enter the battlefield the first time. So free protection is always good. Brass Squire is included in order to equip these things at instant speed, and for free too since all we need to do is tap it down. And not only these equipment, but the rest of the equipment in the deck as well. That way we can save our mana for interaction. Apart from the Brutes and Greaves, Anger in the Graveyard is another way to give Xander haste for free, assuming we control a mountain of course. The deck is running 7 lands with the mountain subtype, but all 9 fetch lands, so we're bound to have one in play for Anger. Back to protecting Xander, Teferi's Veil is some more spicy tech for him. If anyone's planning to wipe the board or use sorcery speed spot removal against Xander, he won't exist by then since he phases out at the end of combat. This is an amazing way to protect Xander since we want to always attack with him when possible to mill out opponents. As for protecting ourselves, keep in mind that Xander starting the game in the command zone makes us the arch enemy from the get-go because the fear of Xander is real. Fortunately, Gissa and Tegrid stealing creatures is a good way to obtain blockers as well as simultaneously reducing attackers since we're stealing them anyways. We can deter attacks against us altogether with propaganda and collective restraint. These can enter the game relatively early on, making opponents have to really use their resources if they're so intent on attacking us. So they're either able to attack us or able to cast spells, but not both. They have to choose what to do with their mana, so they're pretty good in that respect. And Xander's Lounge alone is enough to make Collective Restraint tax opponents for 3 mana per attacker. Crawl Space and Silent Arbiter make it even harder to attack us since they limit how many creatures can even attack us. Silent Arbiter doesn't affect us because if we can only attack with a single creature per combat, it's more than likely going to be Xander. And it doesn't affect Myriad either since the attackers are created from attacking with that single creature anyways. Pact of Negation, Fierce Guardianship, Swan Song, Negate, Mana Drain, and Counterspell are some more protective effects in our deck via the reliability of counter magic. I found that this suite of counter magic is good enough since we want to protect Xander as often as possible, so we'll either have protective equipment in play or a counterspell in hand. Some of these are creeping up in value, but you do want to get the ones that are as cheap as possible since Xander does cost 7 the first time to cast. Cavern of Souls is included for that same reason. We want to keep up mana to protect Xander after casting, as well as casting him for the first time. If we have to use that counterspell to counter the counterspell used to counter him, we will need way too much mana to continue protecting him. Again, these protective effects can be pretty expensive on the secondary market, so how casual or effective you make this deck is up to you. Regardless of what you do, Xander needs protecting. The fear against him is real, as illogical as that may be. Chaos Warp is an amazing catch-all for anything already on the battlefield. Since it shuffles away the permanent, we can then potentially mill it afterwards with Xander, so that's kind of cool too. At least Xander's trigger happens on attack, even combat removing lands won't matter against him, so we don't have to worry too much about those. Damnation, Blasphemous Act, and Cyclonic Rift are some quintessential effects. Keep in mind that the deck takes a while to get online, and in the meantime, we might be getting smacked around by faster decks or token decks, etc. At least Xander halves one opponent's board when he dies. In order to draw into and cast all these spells and interaction, the deck's going to naturally need card advantage and mana acceleration. Nothing too fancy, but the deck's running Stroke of Genius, Blue Sun Zenith, Commander's Insight, Diviner's Portent, Drown in Dreams, and Pull from Tomorrow. Since it takes a while for the deck to get online, we can sink all of our mana into these spells the turn before we cast Xander to keep our hand full of possible responses or afterwards. Pull from Tomorrow is great since we have to discard a card afterwards, potentially discarding away either Anger or Filth. As for the mana needed to power these, Arcane Signet, Dimir Signet, Izzet Signet, Rakdos Signet, Talisman of Creativity, Talisman of Dominance, Talisman of Indulgence, and Soul Ring are obvious includes. The deck's not green, so we need all the help we can get. That being said, these aren't the absolute best ones to get Xander out as quickly as possible. Just as you can make the deck more budget by cheapening the mana base, you can also boost it by including all of the Moxes and other zero-costed Mana Rocks and Mana Vault. That being said, I am running Jeweled Lotus and Dark Ritual since they're relatively easier to obtain than a Mana Crypt, for example. They're not essential for the deck to run, but being able to get 3 turns closer to casting Xander is a welcome thing, especially since both of these together are enough to get Xander out as quickly as turn 2, in this deck at least. The rest of the deck is just the rest of the lands. The deck's running all 9 fetch lands, all 3 shock lands, all 3 snow duels, all 3 opponent lands, Xander's Lounge, Croesus' Catacombs, Command Tower, Reflecting Pool, and Ancient Tomb, as well as 2 of each basic land. As mentioned earlier, as with all of my deck techs, you can build your mana base according to your budget. Whether you include more expensive cards or even cheaper cards is up to you. This brew is just an idea of how to build around Lord Xander, the Collector. Of the crime bosses recently revealed, it seems like Xander was the one that struck people the most with fear. I really don't see why though. The dude costs a whopping 7 mana outside of green and can only hit one opponent per trigger. You need a lot of setup to make it happen by default, and even more so to make the most of his effects, as you've seen in my own deck as an example. That being said, Mill's a fun archetype as is Voltron. Winning via Mill in Commander is no easy feat, so it's always rewarding to pull off. If you're interested in the deck list of this spicy brew of mine, you can find a link to it down in the description. I would like to thank all my patrons for supporting me, and a quick shout out to all my higher tier patrons, the Brewers, for their patronage. I'd also like to thank anyone using my TCG Player affiliate link. That also helps out the channel. And to everyone, thanks for watching this episode of The Brewery on the Commander Tavern. I am the Medic Kirby, and happy brewing.